Stop putting yourself last. Now, that is a piece of advice that we are used to hearing anybody who is in the transformational space. And it's particularly hard when you move from your heart and you have a caring disposition where you're always putting yourself behind everyone else. And even when we have that clear advice of not putting ourselves last, it's hard to implement. It's particularly hard for people who have an empathic disposition. Today, we're going to talk about why this is so hard for our empathic friends and what can be done about it. This is Monterastelli. Welcome to the Tapping Q&A podcast recorded live to tape from Williamsburg in Brooklyn. This is episode 608, originally aired April 24th, 2024. Hi, everyone. I hope this finds you well wherever you are and whatever time of day you're getting a chance to listen to this. Thanks for spending a little time with me today. One of the things that I really love about the work that I do is I work with people who are thoughtful and deliberate. Almost everybody who is trying to do a little work on themselves or a lot of work on themselves are working from a disposition where they recognize the world could be a better place. And that's part of the reason why they're doing their internal work, and they can recognize the struggle of the people around them. And I love the fact that I am constantly surrounded by people who want to make the world a better place and want to be an agent of change inside of that. But it can become really, really difficult when we recognize all of the struggle that there is in the world, because there doesn't feel like there is an end to that struggle, which makes it really easy for us to feel like we are not living up to what is possible as humans, because we know transformational tools, we know a way forward, and there are people around us who are suffering. But when this happens, we can be in a circumstance where we are constantly giving and giving and giving, and we're putting ourselves last. Now, for people who are empathetic, there's actually another reason why it's really, really hard for them to stop putting themselves last. And so that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to explore how do we make sure that we are being caring, thoughtful people in the world and recognizing what those obstacles are for us to be doing that in that particular way. Now, at the end of all of this, after we kind of talk through the framework, what we're going to do is we're going to do a little tapping. Tapping is this really amazing tool that I use daily, that I use with my clients, that gives us an opportunity to transform the way we are processing and experiencing the world. It's super, super valuable. If you are new to tapping, all you need to do is follow the little red arrow in the upper right-hand corner. That will take you to learntotap.com. Click on the link. Download the little process so that you can add tapping into your life. It's super simple. It's super easy. After you download it, in 10 minutes, you're going to be tapping on your own. So before we begin and dive into this, I think that it's important that we have common vocabulary. Every class that I teach, I'm always defining the terms I'm going to use, not because I'm trying to convince people of what I'm trying to say, but just so that we have a common vocabulary. And so as we work our way through this conversation, I'm going to be using empathy and empathetic quite a bit. And so I want you to know where I'm coming from. So there is a difference between being sympathetic and being empathetic. When we are being sympathetic, what we are doing is we are able to recognize the fact that someone else is having a hard time and care for them in that particular way. When we are being empathetic, we are actually feeling the pain that they are feeling along with them. So sympathy is, I am beside someone in struggle. Empathy is, I am feeling the struggle along with them. And both of them have a great place in our life. When I am working with clients, it is appropriate that I am sympathetic to them, that I am being mindful of their struggle, that I'm acknowledging and letting them create voice for that. But it's inappropriate and it's unuseful and sometimes it's unhealthy for me to be empathetic with my clients because I'm feeling the pain along with them. It's going to be really hard for me to help them. You know, whenever someone is caught in quicksand, what you do is you stand outside the quicksand and you throw a rope to them. You don't jump into the quicksand with them to help them out. When I'm sympathetic, I'm standing on the shore, I'm recognizing the problem, I'm throwing the rope into the person who is stuck in this quicksand. When I'm empathetic, I'm actually jumping in with them. Now, in my life, when it comes to my friends, my family, people I spend time with outside of my professional setting, 100%, it's appropriate for me to be empathetic with them. to be able to share that emotional experience. So both of them are really, really useful. They're different experiences and they have a different context. Now, empathy is something that is an aptitude and an ability. So the difference for me between aptitude and ability is aptitude is the natural disposition we have. Ability is the skill we add to it. I'm sure when you were growing up, there was someone in your grade school who had a natural aptitude for sports or for gymnastics. And as time developed, if they were interested in that particular thing, they got coaching, they practiced, they added to their ability. And so I could spend lots and lots of time to learn how to play basketball and improve my basketball skill. That is my ability, but I'm starting at a very low aptitude compared to a professional basketball player. And so our ability to do something is the combination of those two things. And so oftentimes when we are talking about people who are empathetic, what we are saying is they have the natural aptitude for recognizing and feeling the emotional experience of the people around them. I am not someone who is naturally empathetic. I'm not someone who immediately feels the emotion of the people in my life. But after working with clients for 15 years and listening very, very closely, I have fostered the ability to be present in an empathetic way when that is a useful tool. And so as we step into this, it's important to recognize there are people who are operating from a position where they are keenly aware and they feel the emotional experience of the people around them. The reason why in a client session it's appropriate for me to have sympathy and to stay away from empathy is so that I can be present inside of myself as useful. And so it is useful to be aware of people's emotional experience. And it can become a burden if I'm constantly feeling it all of the time. So what we're going to do is we're going to move through a couple of points to help you to understand why it is harder for people who experience empathy to be able to create those healthy boundaries and what they can do to respond to that. So first of all, people recognize who the helpers are. One of the most famous things Mr. Rogers ever said, Mr. Rogers was one of the children's television programs us Americans grew up with, who was kind and was thoughtful. And he said, when you're in trouble, look for the helpers. Look for the people who are going to help you out. And the people in our lives recognize who the helpers are. That they can recognize by the way we carry ourselves in the world, and they recognize because when they have problems, we help them out. What we are constantly doing is we are creating definitions of all the people in your life. If you were in a circumstance right now where you had trouble with your computer, you would probably know the first one or two people who you would want to reach out to. Or if you're in a circumstance where you had a physical issue or a legal issue, you know who the helpers are in your life. And you also know, if you are struggling with something, who is the person whose ear you want to bend? Who is the person that you want to be present for you in that particular way? And if, again, you are in transformation, if you are trying to make yourself healthier and move forward, more than likely you have demonstrated in your life that you are a helper. And because you are a helper, when people in our lives struggle, they want to come to us to receive help because they know we're going to be on the other side and we're going to be willing to be helpful. So the second thing to consider is because we are the people who are helpful, we are conditioning the people in our lives to recognize the fact that we are going to help them when they are in trouble. And this is useful to a point. I love being an aid to the people in my life. But if I put myself in a position where I am almost creating a sense of learned helplessness of the people in my life, where they know when something goes wrong, then I'm going to be the person they're going to reach out to. And I'm sure you have been in a circumstance where someone has asked you for something because you are that helper, and your first thought was, did you Google that? Because we become helpful so often, people recognize the way I solve this problem is When I have a particular problem, I know the books that I reach for, I know the websites that I go to, I know the people I reach out to. But if we become that person who is always helping all of the time, we end up in a circumstance where we just become the solution to everything, which makes it hard for us to start creating boundaries because there's all of these inbound requests for our help. And we want to be a helpful person. And so we are creating this feedback loop of they are in trouble, I am helpful, which teaches them I am helpful. So the next time they are in trouble, they reach out to me to be helpful. Now, for many of us, as this unfolds, at a certain point, we start to recognize the fact that people are dumping everything on us. They're unwilling to solve things in their own life. And this can be really frustrating because you have someone you have a relationship with, a friend, a coworker, a family member. That's a really difficult conversation to have, saying, please stop coming to me all of the time, because then we can feel like, whether or not it's true, that we're coming off as a jerk. And so sometimes we are in a situation where we can gently and easily, in subtle ways, start to renegotiate that relationship. I'll give you an example from my own life. So there was a relationship I had in my life where the boundaries became very, very porous. And the reason was, if this other person was struggling in their life, it made my life harder. It made my life more complicated. It made everything in my life more difficult. And so I was solving this person's small problems over and over and over again. Because by solving their small problem, it made my day easier. But because, like we just shared, I was always solving their problems, they stopped trying to solve their problems themselves. So then they started coming to me more and more often to solve their problems. So again, it created that particular feedback loop. And so the way I was able to renegotiate this particular relationship was the way that I responded to their request for help. They would call me up and say, hey, Gene, I'm struggling with this thing, expecting me to provide a solution. And my response became, I'm sorry, that really sucks. Now, in some cases, I actually had to do it through gritted teeth. I'm sorry, that really sucks, because I so desperately wanted to solve the problem, because there's a part of me that wants to solve the problem and it makes things easier. And after I would say, I'm sorry, you're experiencing that. That sounds like it really sucks. I would just shut up. And they would talk some more and they would complain some more. And again, I'd say, boy, I'm really sorry. That sounds like it sucks. I'm sorry you're going through that. So I wasn't dismissing their struggle. I was hearing them. I was acknowledging it. Now, if they asked me some really direct questions, I would respond to those really direct questions, but I just listened and sympathized with them. And in the process of doing that over time, and it was over months, but over time, what happened was the number of inbound requests started going down and down and down, to the point where I was getting about a third of the requests from this person. And that third happened to be the third that was appropriate for me to help out with. Because what slowly happened was they either started reaching out to other people or started solving those small problems by themselves, because implicitly, they started to learn I wasn't just going to solve the problem for them. So I was able to slowly and gently renegotiate that boundary, which made it easier and healthier for me, because I wasn't constantly putting myself last by constantly solving their problem. Now, in concept, I know what I have just explained is simple. It's straightforward. There is a boundary that needs to be created. I'm going to find a way, explicitly or implicitly, to renegotiate that particular boundary. But just because something is simple doesn't mean it's easy. And I would be willing to bet you are a person who has been struggling with this, and I just need to set boundaries. And so you're not setting boundaries, and you have the opportunity to beat yourself up because you know the right thing to do by creating those boundaries, and you're not doing it. So you're letting yourself down. And so what I want to do is I want to let you off the hook a little bit, so you're not beating yourself up about this. Because if you are a person who experiences empathy, it's not just as simple as creating a new boundary and renegotiating that. For me, because I don't have a disposition that is empathetic, when the person called me struggling, it was an intellectual problem and I could sympathize with what they were struggling with, but I wasn't feeling the pain. For people who are more empathic, when someone shows up to them with trouble, they're feeling the pain. And so one of the reasons why people who have an empathetic disposition are very good at putting themselves last is because when they solve the problem for someone else, they're solving the problem for themselves. Because the person who has come to them in distress is no longer in distress, so the empathetic person doesn't feel the distress in the middle of their chest. And so, to try and do what I explained, where you're renegotiating that boundary, what that requires an empathetic person to do is it requires them to stay stuck in the pain in the short term. Because by not helping out, the person has come to them in distress, and maybe being heard makes them feel a little less distressed, but they're still in distress. So you as the helper are caught in that distress as well. And so it makes sense. If you are feeling the pain and the emotion of everyone around you, there is a part of you on a subconscious level that is trying to make your day better by alleviating the pain of the people around you. And so that is the primary reason why, if you have the natural aptitude of someone who is empathetic and experiences what is going on around you, why it is so hard for you to create boundaries. It's not because you don't think you're worthy of those boundaries. It's not because you're not capable of creating those boundaries. It's because creating those boundaries takes time, and you have to stay in pain while you are creating those boundaries. And so it makes sense that we want to escape the pain in the short term so we don't have to experience it, which means in escaping the pain, we're feeling better in the moment, but we're creating that loop of, I'm in distress, therefore I can go to this person. And so we are conditioning them to come to us while they are in pain. So because you are experiencing that pain, you're acting in such a way that you're training them to come to you in your pain. And again, I'm not saying this to beat you up, and I'm not saying this to say you're doing it wrong. I'm saying this is why it is so hard. And to quote our buddy Milton Erickson, all transformation starts by stating what is. And so by having this simple understanding, one, I hope it puts you into a position where you don't beat yourself up for not creating boundaries in a more healthy way, because you're up against something that is much harder than I'm up against when I'm creating boundaries. Secondly, it doesn't have to be this way. That we can put ourselves in a position where we can gently move forward and we can gently transform this. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to do a little tapping around this. And we're going to do this in two parts. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to do some tapping about being gracious, about not having effective boundaries, about being gracious, about the reason why we're not having those effective boundaries. Then we're going to tap on giving ourselves permission to act in new ways. So tap with me. Tap on the side of the hand. Take a nice big deep breath. And take another nice big deep breath. And just move from tapping point to tapping point, repeating after me. I recognize the fact I struggle creating boundaries. And the reason I struggle creating boundaries is because I can feel the pain that others are going through. And if I create a boundary around my time and attention, and I'm not rushing in to solve their problem, I still feel their pain. I still feel their discomfort. which makes it hard. Because creating new boundaries is about long-term change, which does not relieve the pain I am feeling in this moment. And I know I should have more boundaries. And I know I should have more consistent boundaries. And I know I should have stronger boundaries. But I also give myself permission to be gentle with myself. Because the reason I am struggling is because I just don't want to be in pain in the moment. And it's appropriate for me not to want to be in pain in the moment. And it's healthy for me not to be in pain in the moment. And so even though I struggle to create the boundaries I need to create, I give myself permission to be gentle with myself. Around the way, I evaluate my boundaries, or lack of. I also recognize the fact I do want better boundaries. I don't want to keep putting myself last forever, because that means I'm putting my health last. I'm putting my dreams last. I'm putting my relationships last. I give myself permission to know it might be hard in the short term. It might be painful in the short term to start creating new boundaries. But in the long term, it is safe for me to create boundaries. I am allowed to create boundaries. I'm actually made for having healthy boundaries. I am worthy of healthy boundaries. I am deserving of healthy boundaries. I give myself permission to be gentle with myself as I work my way through this. I give myself permission to admit this is hard. I give myself permission to reach out for more help. I give myself permission to try and fail at this until I figure it out. I am worthy of healthy boundaries. I am deserving of healthy boundaries. I give myself permission to start working towards those healthy boundaries. Nice big deep breath. Now, I have a feeling that as we did that, we found as many tail enders as we found relief, and there's more work to do with that. Because this is a big thing. Like, again, this is one of those things that we talked about earlier that is simple but isn't necessarily easy. But you're so worth creating a life that you love. And creating a life that you love means that you are a helper, means that you are giftedness, using your giftedness to take care of others. But it doesn't mean that you're constantly putting yourself last. You are welcome at the banquet table of life. You are worthy of more than just the crumbs. And so if you're struggling with this, go back, tap on that again, reach out to me, reach out for help, reach out to someone else in your life. Don't try and suffer through this alone, because as you create healthier boundaries, it's going to make it so much easier for you to be the type of helper you want to be in the world, but more importantly, to create a life that you love that isn't defined by purely the way that you help others. If you know someone in your life who would appreciate this conversation, I'd really encourage you to pass it along. We always joke about the fact that our marketing budget is your word of mouth. But more importantly, if you reach out to someone in your life and say, hey, I'm thinking of you today, this is something that might be useful, even if they don't listen to this at all, the simple fact you've reached out and you've said, hey, I'm thinking of you today, is going to make their day better. I know it sounds cheesy. It feels cheesy coming out of my mouth, but it is 100% true. And you know that it is true. As you look at the screen right now, you can actually see a playlist of all of the teaching that we have on the website. Click on that playlist so you can continue to dive in and learn more. And I look forward to talking with you and tapping with you again real soon. Bye-bye.